Elvis Presley's secret emergency hospital report has finally been released, and the truth inside it is heartbreaking. Doctors who tried to save the king wrote details that the world was never meant to see. One nurse whispered, "It all happened faster than anyone believed." These hidden notes reveal his pain, his final struggle, and the shocking reality behind his last moments. Fans thought they knew the story, but this confidential file shows a different picture, one filled with fear, confusion, and unanswered questions. Now that the report is out, nothing about his final day feels the same again. And the most devastating part comes next, when the king's heart gave out. Elvis Presley had always been a man who filled every space he entered with warmth and presence. His smile could light up a room, and his genuine kindness toward everyone around him had earned him deep loyalty from those who worked beside him day after day. But today, that vibrant energy seemed dimmed, like a light struggling against an approaching darkness. Mary, one of the housekeepers who had known him for years, noticed him pause at the bottom of the staircase, gripping the railing tighter than necessary. She had seen him tired before, seen him under stress, but this seemed different. His eyes held a distant quality, as if he was somewhere far away, even while standing right there. "Mr. Presley, can I get you anything?" she asked gently, her voice filled with the maternal concern she had always felt for him. He turned slowly, offering a weak smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm all right, Mary. Just need to rest a bit." But those who loved him could see through the brave front. During a brief conversation with his aide, Elvis seemed to lose his train of thought mid-sentence, his words trailing off into silence. His attention drifted like a boat that had lost its anchor. The people around him exchanged worried glances but hesitated to press him, respecting his privacy while fighting their growing unease. As the hours crawled forward, Elvis retreated upstairs, seeking the solitude of his private quarters. The house settled into an uneasy quiet, with staff members going about their duties while keeping their ears tuned for any sound from above, any sign that he might need them. Then it happened. A sound that would haunt those walls forever. The dull, terrible thud of a body hitting the floor. Everything erupted into chaos. Feet thundered up the stairs. Voices called out his name with rising panic. When they found him, their worst fears materialized before their eyes. The man who had moved millions with his voice lay motionless, his face drained of color, his body utterly still. Someone screamed. Someone else ran for the phone, fingers trembling so badly they could barely dial. The words came out in a desperate rush. "Please, we need an ambulance at Graceland right now. Please, hurry, please." The minutes that followed stretched like hours. Every second felt like a lifetime as people knelt beside him, afraid to move him, afraid not to, their hands hovering uselessly while tears streamed down their faces. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not to their kind, generous, sweet-hearted Elvis. When the paramedics burst through the front doors, their professional urgency brought a strange mix of hope and terror. They moved with practiced efficiency, but their faces told a story that no one wanted to read. Kneeling beside him, they searched for signs of life, a pulse, a breath, anything that said he was still fighting. The room filled with tense medical terminology, words that sounded clinical and cold in the warm, lived-in space that had always been full of laughter and music. Monitors were attached. Equipment appeared from bags with frightening speed. The paramedics worked with intense focus, their movements deliberate yet hurried, as if they were racing against an invisible clock that was running out far too fast. "We've got something," one of them said, but his tone carried more concern than relief. The faint signals they detected were so weak, so fragile, that everyone held their breath, afraid that even the air in the room might be too much. The staff members stood back, pressed against the walls, watching helplessly as strangers fought for the life of the man they loved. Some prayed, some cried silently. All of them felt the weight of disbelief crushing down on their chests. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Not for him. Not for someone who had given so much joy to the world. The paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher with careful urgency. As they carried him toward the door, the reality of the moment crashed over everyone like a wave. This might be the last time these walls would hold him. This might be goodbye. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing him inside with the medical team. The driver hit the gas, and the vehicle screamed through the streets of Memphis, lights flashing, sirens wailing a desperate song that cut through the afternoon air. Traffic parted before them, but even at top speed, the journey felt impossibly slow. Inside the ambulance, the world narrowed to that small, confined space where life and death hung in the most delicate balance imaginable. The paramedics continued their work, their hands steady despite the gravity of who lay before them. They spoke in low, urgent voices, coordinating their efforts, adjusting equipment, monitoring every tiny change. "Blood pressure dropping," someone announced, and the words hung heavy in the air. They pushed medications, adjusted oxygen levels, did everything their training had prepared them for. But beneath their professional composure, they felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another call. This was Elvis Presley, whose music had been the soundtrack to their own lives, whose kindness to strangers was legendary, and whose sweet nature had made him beloved beyond measure. Outside, the ambulance windows, Memphis moved past in a blur. People on sidewalks had no idea that history was racing past them. They couldn't know that inside that vehicle, heroes were fighting with everything they had to save a life that had touched millions. The hospital loomed ahead, its emergency entrance already alerted and prepared. As the ambulance pulled up, the doors flew open and a coordinated rush began. Elvis was moved from the ambulance to a gurney in one fluid motion, the medical team never breaking stride as they wheeled him through the automatic doors. The emergency room transformed into a flurry of controlled urgency. Doctors and nurses appeared from every direction, their years of training taking over. They surrounded him, their voices calling out vitals, medication names, procedural steps. Machines were connected with practice speed, each one adding its own sound to the symphony of desperation that filled the room. The medical staff quickly assessed the situation, and their faces grew grave. This wasn't a simple case. This was critical, life-threatening. The machines began their work, monitors beeping and whirring, creating a harsh mechanical chorus that contrasted painfully with the human silence at the center of it all. The man on that table had been larger than life, his voice capable of stirring souls, his smile capable of bringing comfort to anyone lucky enough to receive it. Now he lay still, his fate in the hands of doctors who were doing everything medicine could offer. What did the chief physician see in the early scans that made his face fall, when medicine couldn't save the king? Dr. Harrison, the senior cardiologist, stood at the side table reviewing the preliminary reports that were coming in from various tests. His experienced eyes moved across the pages, and with each line he read, his expression grew heavier. This wasn't a sudden failure. This was the final chapter of a struggle that had been unfolding for weeks, maybe months, maybe even longer. "Look at this," he said quietly to his colleague, pointing to the charts. The exhaustion wasn't just tiredness. His body was sending signals. Another doctor leaned in, studying the data. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Elvis's heart had been beating irregularly, fighting to maintain its rhythm while under tremendous strain. His breathing had been compromised, his lungs working harder than they should have wanted to. These weren't the numbers of someone who had simply pushed too hard one day. These were the numbers of someone whose body had been waging a quiet, desperate war. Elvis Presley, the man whose kindness had touched everyone who knew him. whose generous spirit had led him to give away cars and money and time to anyone in need, had been suffering in silence. He had continued smiling, continued performing, continued being the light in other people's lives, even while his own light was flickering. "Why didn't anyone see this sooner?" a younger nurse whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Dr. Harrison shook his head slowly. Maybe people saw it but didn't want to believe it. Maybe he hid it well. Maybe everyone around him was too close to see what was happening. The truth was settling over the medical team like a heavy blanket. This sweet, remarkable man had kept going long past the point when his body had started begging him to stop. The years of constant touring, the endless demands, the emotional weight of being Elvis Presley. It had all taken a toll that no one had fully acknowledged until this terrible moment. Dr. Chen, the head of the emergency team, returned to Elvis's side, her face set with determination. "We're not giving up," she said firmly. "Prepare for another round." The team moved into position once more. They had already attempted resuscitation twice, but Dr. Chen's eyes held a fierce resolve. This was Elvis Presley lying before them, a man whose music had brought joy to millions, whose genuine sweetness had made him beloved far beyond his talent. They would fight for him with everything they had. "Clear," Dr. Chen called out, and the room held its collective breath. The machine delivered its shock, everyone's eyes fixed on the monitors, searching desperately for a response, for any sign that his kind heart was ready to beat again on its own. The seconds ticked by in agonizing slowness. Nothing changed. "Again," Dr. Chen ordered, her voice steady despite the emotion building behind it. "Charging to 200. They worked with practiced precision, but beneath their professional movements, each person in that room was acutely aware of who they were trying to save. This wasn't just another patient. This was a man who had changed music forever. This was someone who had treated everyone from his closest friends to complete strangers with the same warmth and respect. This was Elvis, whose smile had been genuine, whose concern for others had been real, whose heart, both literally and figuratively, had given so much. The third attempt brought the same heartbreaking result, then the fourth. Each time, the medical team poured everything they knew into the effort, refusing to accept what the monitors were telling them. Dr. Harrison administered medications, adjusting dosages, trying different combinations. Nurses worked the equipment with expert hands. Everyone in the room was united in a single, desperate purpose. "His heart's been through too much," Dr. Chen said softly, but she didn't stop. "One more time. Come on, Elvis. Stay with us." The fifth attempt. The sixth. The machines did their work, sending jolts of electricity through a body that had danced across stages, that had moved with such natural grace and power. But that powerful body was no longer responding. The heart that had beaten out rhythm and blues, that had pumped life through a man who gave so generously of himself, had simply worn too thin. Dr. Chen's hands trembled slightly as she prepared for yet another attempt. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Around her, the team's faces showed the strain of pushing against an outcome they were beginning to understand was inevitable. But still, they tried. How could they not? This was Elvis Presley, whose legacy of kindness was as important as his musical genius. After the eighth resuscitation attempt, Dr. Harrison gently placed his hand on Dr. Chen's shoulder. Their eyes met, and in that look, an entire conversation passed between them. They had done everything. They had tried every method, every technique, every desperate measure in their medical arsenal. Dr. Chen's shoulders sagged. She looked down at Elvis, at the face that had been so familiar to the world, now peaceful in a way that broke everyone's heart. Tears welled in her eyes, and she didn't bother to hide them. "Time of death," she said, her voice cracking on the words, 3:30 p.m. The room fell into a silence that felt sacred and terrible all at once. Machines were switched off, their beeping and humming fading away until there was nothing but the sound of people breathing, crying softly, trying to comprehend what had just happened. A nurse moved forward and gently pulled a sheet up, covering the man who had been the king of rock and roll. Her hands were shaking. Tears streamed down her face unchecked. Around her, hardened medical professionals who had seen countless emergencies, who had learned to maintain distance from their patients' outcomes, stood with tears in their own eyes. This was different. Everyone felt it. Dr. Harrison stepped away from the table, removing his gloves with movements that seemed suddenly exhausted. His face looked years older than it had an hour ago. He had delivered difficult news to families before, had pronounced death too many times to count, but this felt like losing someone he knew personally, even though he had never met Elvis before today. "He gave everything," someone whispered. "His heart literally gave everything it had." And it was true. Elvis Presley's heart, that organ that had pumped life and energy and passion through him for 42 years, had been stretched beyond its capacity by years of pressure, touring, emotional struggles, and the weight of being a legend. It had kept going far longer than it should have, fueled perhaps by Elvis's own generous spirit, his desire to keep giving to others, to keep performing, to keep being the man everyone wanted him to be. What would the hospital do with the sensitive information now lying on their desks? Secrets, locked behind hospital doors. Dr. Margaret Whitfield, the hospital's chief administrator, sat at the head of the conference table. Her reading glasses perched on her nose as she carefully reviewed the pages before her. "This needs to be sealed," she said quietly, looking up at the small group assembled around her. "Access is restricted to senior staff only. We need to understand what we're dealing with before anything leaves this room." The emergency report had been compiled with meticulous care by the medical team who had fought so desperately to save Elvis Presley's life. Every observation, every test result, every finding had been documented with the precision that medical science demanded. But this wasn't just any medical report. This was a detailed account of how and why a legend had died, and the truth contained within these pages was more complex and heartbreaking than anyone outside that room could imagine. Dr. Thomas Reed, one of the cardiologists who had been in the emergency room, sat with his copy of the report open before him. His kind eyes, usually warm and reassuring with patients, now looked haunted as he read through the findings again. He had spent his entire career helping hearts keep beating, and seeing this particular heart story laid out in clinical terms felt almost unbearable. "Look at section 3, he said softly, his finger tracing down the page. The heart distress wasn't sudden. The damage patterns show this had been developing for a considerable time. The report painted a portrait that was both medically precise and deeply human. Elvis's heart showed clear signs of severe strain, the muscle tissue stretched and weakened from years of working overtime. His organs had been under tremendous pressure, fighting to keep up with demands that had slowly exceeded their capacity. The chronic fatigue that people had attributed to his intense schedule was actually his body's desperate signal that it was running on empty. "He never complained," whispered Dr. Sarah Martinez, who had been among those fighting to save him. "According to everyone we've spoken with, he just kept going, kept being there for others." First attempt, 3:02 p.m., 30 compressions, 2 breaths, epinephrine administered, defibrillation at 150 joules, no response. Second attempt, 3:05 p.m., continued compressions, additional medication, increased voltage, minimal cardiac activity detected, unsustained. The sequence continued through 8 separate attempts, each one documented with the same careful detail. But behind every clinical notation was the unwritten story of doctors and nurses who had poured their hearts into saving a man whose own heart had simply given all it could give. Reading through the timeline felt like watching the last breaths of someone extraordinary. This was a man who had once commanded stages with nothing but his voice and his presence, who had moved entire arenas full of people with a single note, a single movement. And here, reduced to medical terminology, was the account of how that magnificent force had finally flickered out, despite every effort to keep it burning. Dr. Whitfield removed her glasses and rubbed her tired eyes. "The level of detail here is unprecedented," she said, "but it's also brutally honest about what his body had endured." The report didn't shy away from difficult truths. It documented the toll that years of constant performance, emotional pressure, and physical demands had taken. It showed how Elvis's body had been in crisis mode far longer than anyone had realized, how warning signs had been present, but perhaps missed or dismissed. The document revealed a man who had sacrificed his health in service of his art and his audience, whose kind nature had made it impossible for him to say no, even when his body was begging him to stop. Hospital leadership sat in heavy silence as they contemplated what lay before them. The report was complete, accurate, and absolutely raw in its honesty. It held answers that grieving fans would desperately want, that family members deserved to understand, that historians would eventually need to know. But it also held truths that felt almost too painful to share. "The public reaction will be enormous," said James Crawford, the hospital's legal counsel. His voice was measured, thoughtful. "Once this information becomes public, there will be no taking it back, no softening it, no context we can add that will make it easier to absorb." Dr. Reed looked up from the report, his expression troubled. "But don't people deserve the truth? Don't they deserve to know that he was struggling, that he wanted help none of us knew to give him?" "The truth is one thing," Dr. Martinez countered gently. "But the way truth is received is another. This report shows a man in complete physical crisis. It shows pain, deterioration, suffering. Is that how the world should remember him?" Around the table, faces reflected the weight of the decision they faced. Some believed strongly that honesty was the only ethical path forward, that medical transparency demanded they share what they had discovered. Others worried about the impact such raw, unfiltered information would have on a grieving public, on a family in shock, on a legacy that deserved to be honored. "His kindness defined him," Dr. Whitfield said slowly. "Everyone who met him says the same thing. He was genuinely sweet, genuinely caring. He made people feel special. He gave constantly. Should his final chapter be defined by medical terminology and organ failure statistics?" The debate continued into the evening hours. Coffee cups accumulated on the table. Voices rose and fell with passion and concern. Each person in that room genuinely cared about doing the right thing, but nobody could agree on what the right thing actually was. As midnight approached, Dr. Whitfield made a decision. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and emotion, but her voice was firm. "We're sealing this," she announced. What made them lock the report away instead of telling the world? The truth that waited. Janet Morrison sat in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, her eyes years of carrying a burden she had never been allowed to share. She had been a medical records clerk at the hospital in 1977, young and idealistic, believing in the importance of truth and transparency. Across from her sat Daniel Chen, an investigative journalist who had spent years researching Elvis's final days. "I've kept this secret for so long," Janet said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm 71 years old now, and I can't take it to my grave. People deserve to know. Elvis deserves to have his story told truthfully." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder containing photocopies of documents she had made decades ago, copies she had hidden away, knowing somehow that one day the truth would need to come out. The emergency report that hospital leadership had sealed away all those years ago, the document that held the real medical story of Elvis Presley's final day. "This isn't gossip," she explained, sliding the folder across the table. This isn't speculation or rumor. This is what actually happened, written by the doctors who were there, documented in real time as they fought to save him. Daniel opened the folder with hands that shook from excitement and apprehension. As he began reading, his expression shifted from curiosity to shock to deep, profound sadness. The pages before him told a story that was more heartbreaking than any of the rumors or theories that had circulated for decades. The medical findings were devastatingly clear. Elvis's heart had been in severe distress, not from a sudden event, but from prolonged, relentless strain. The report documented how his cardiovascular system had been failing silently over an extended period, how his body had been fighting a battle that no one fully recognized until it was far too late. The chronic exhaustion that everyone had attributed to his demanding schedule was actually a symptom of organs struggling to function under impossible conditions. What made the report particularly painful was how it revealed the extent to which Elvis had pushed through overwhelming physical suffering. This wasn't a man who had simply worked too hard one day. This was someone whose generous, sweet nature had made it impossible for him to stop giving, even when his body was screaming for him to rest. He had continued performing, continued being present for others, continued offering that genuine kindness he was known for, all while his system was breaking down. When the report was finally released to the public through Daniel's carefully researched article, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Television news programs interrupted their regular broadcasts. Radio stations played Elvis's music, while announcers read portions of the findings with voices choked with emotion. Social media platforms, which hadn't even existed when Elvis died, exploded with millions of people sharing their grief and shock. Maria Rodriguez, who had been only 7 years old when Elvis died, but had grown up loving his music through her parents' record collection, sat in her living room reading the report on her tablet. Tears streamed down her face as she absorbed the medical details that painted such a vivid, painful picture. "He was suffering so much," she whispered to her husband. "All those times he smiled and performed and made people happy. His heart was literally failing. How did he keep going?" Across the world, similar scenes played out in countless homes. People who had mourned Elvis in 1977 found themselves mourning him all over again, but this time with a fuller, more devastating understanding of what he had endured. The report transformed abstract loss into concrete reality, replacing decades of speculation with hard medical truth. The document detailed those final resuscitation attempts with clinical precision, but readers couldn't help but imagine the human drama behind each notation. 8 separate times doctors had fought to restart a heart that had given everything it could possibly give. 8 times, medical professionals had refused to accept that the king of rock and roll was slipping away. The report showed their desperation, their determination, their ultimate heartbreak when nothing they tried could bring him back. Online forums filled with discussions that mixed grief with appreciation. People began to understand Elvis's final years differently. His slower movements on stage weren't laziness. They were a man conserving energy his body no longer had. His weight gain wasn't simply overindulgence. It was a body in crisis responding to multiple failing systems. His occasional confusion or distraction wasn't unprofessionalism. It was someone fighting through symptoms that would have hospitalized most people. "We judged him," wrote one fan on a memorial website. "Some of us criticized him for not being the young, energetic Elvis anymore, but he was dying, and he was still showing up for us, still being kind, still trying to give us everything he had." The revelation changed countless perspectives. Music historians revised their assessments of his final performances, now viewing them through the lens of a man battling enormous physical challenges. Biographers began new editions of their books, incorporating the medical truth into their narratives. Documentaries were produced exploring how the findings confirmed some suspicions while completely contradicting other long-held beliefs. But amid all the grief and shock, something beautiful began to emerge. The report, devastating as it was, ultimately served to deepen people's appreciation for Elvis's legacy rather than diminish it. Yes, it showed a man in physical crisis. Yes, it revealed suffering and struggle. But it also illuminated the incredible strength of his spirit, the depth of his dedication, the genuine sweetness of his nature that kept him going long past the point when others would have stopped. His music took on new meaning. When people listened to recordings from his final years, they heard not just a voice, but a testament to human perseverance. They heard someone pouring out beauty even while experiencing pain. They heard generosity of spirit that transcended physical limitation. Sarah Mitchell, a music professor who had studied Elvis's career for 40 years, stood before her class and spoke with tears in her eyes about what the report had revealed. "This is what true artistry looks like," she said. "This is what it means to give everything." Elvis didn't stop when it became hard. He didn't stop when his body was failing. He kept bringing joy to others because that's who he was at his core. A man whose sweetness and generosity couldn't be contained even by physical suffering. The report became, unexpectedly, a reminder not of weakness, but of extraordinary strength. It showed a human being pushing beyond normal limits, choosing again and again to be present for others, despite tremendous personal cost. It revealed that the kindness people had always attributed to Elvis wasn't just a personality trait. It was something so fundamental to who he was that not even failing health could suppress it. Graceland saw an increase in visitors after the report's release, but the tone of those visits had changed. People came not just to celebrate the glamour and excitement of Elvis's life, but to honor the courage and heart he had shown in his final years. They stood in the rooms where he had lived and loved, understanding now just how much strength it had taken for him to keep being Elvis Presley when his body was breaking down.